Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Curve Uncensored today. Today, I have an awesome guest for you. I have a young lady that is a seven-time published author. So she's written many books. She's also a pre-marriage and family therapist, and she's fairly young from what I can see. So she's been very busy, if I must say. Leah, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Okay, now, as I said, you are a seven-time published author.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and what motivates you and where do you get the ideas from and the passion for the different books you've written?
Yeah. So my backstory, I'm a native of Queens, New York. I am the daughter of two addicts. So my mother and father both battled with addiction. My mom was a drug addict my entire life. My dad battled with alcoholism and incarceration. So as a young girl, dealing with those feelings around abandonment, rejection, feeling like nobody wanted me, I turned to writing. So my
Mhm.
grandmother would always say, because I was raised by my maternal grandmother, she always said she always saw me with a book and pen somewhere, right?
Right.
I didn't know that writing was actually going to be the start of me becoming an author. I just knew that writing was a way of escape. And so as a young girl, I either was penning poems or I was creating these stories about who my parents were because I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And a lot of my friends came from two parent homes. So I was
Hmm.
like the odd one out because it was me, my grandma, my grandpa, my aunt, and then my siblings. So automatically, I kind of felt like I stepped out, I stuck out like a sore thumb, right? And
Hmm.
so to deal with the emotions about not having my parents, I turned to writing. And so writing was my way of escape. I would create these false stories, these fantasy stories. So when people would ask me about my parents, I always had this elaborate story like my dad was a CIA agent on a top secret mission because it was
Hmm.
easier to create this fantasy world than it
Right.
was to live in the reality and the truth of me being the daughter of two addicts. So writing started as a young girl. And then I would say probably not until I was in my 20s when
Hmm.
God really spoke to me about writing a book back in 2015, 2016. And I'm like, one, who's writing a book? Two, write a book about what? And three, who's going to read it? Right? Like,
Hmm.
it was too far fetched for me to believe that I could be an author. But in my obedience, I said, okay, God, well, if I'm supposed to write this book, you need to tell me what I'm supposed to write about. And I need you to line it up, right? Like, if this is really what you want me to do, I'm trusting that you got the provision. And he did. So my
Hmm.
very first book, Unapologetically Me, Living, Owning, and Walking in My Truth, is literally the story of my tumultuous relationship with my mother and this battle to love her and hate her all at the same time. And I really talk about that mother daughter dynamic. It's very, very tough, especially if
Hmm.
your mom's an addict. But it's even more tough when your mom's not, right? Because parents don't come with tool books and rule books and guides on how to
Never,
raise
no.
their children, right? They're doing the best that they can. I know that now. But when I was that broken young little girl in desperate need of her mommy and couldn't understand why she chose drugs over me, it was a little rough. So I loved her.
Right.
In my heart, I loved her. She's my mom. I looked up to her like a hero. But
Hmm.
as I got older, um, I just despised her. I despised what she did. I despised the lifestyle. I didn't really understand addiction, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I got in the field of marriage and family therapy anyway. But I didn't understand it. It just was a part of my life. And so I had this tumultuous relationship, and that was the very first book that I wrote. And it's still one of my best-selling books today because so many women relate to that battle of loving and having a love and hate relationship with their mother and that mother-daughter dynamic.
Do you think that most people that relate to you because of the addiction that you experience, or just in general the relationships, the mother and daughter
It's a
relationship?
combination of both. I've had women that are like, yeah, my mom's an addict too, and I can totally relate. And then I've had women that are like, I just have had a very rough relationship with my mom, and I
Hmm.
totally get. I could think back to just very on one of my very first readers. She was like, I wish I had your book right before my mom had died, because that was me. Like, I had this very love-hate dynamic. It was like, I love her, but I can't stand her, but I don't really know what to do about the fact that I can't stand her. Like, and it's this
Right.
internal battle. And so I've had a combination of both. Some that have had mothers that had addiction, and some that just had a really rough relationship with their mother.
Now, do you? I know that you stated you wrote a lot. Your books are mainly fiction, right? Is that what you stated, or are they nonfiction? A
Nonfiction. So,
combination.
yeah, I
Okay,
write
nonfiction.
nonfiction mainly.
Okay, all right. And I know you stated that you wrote a lot about your experiences. Have you ever written a book about what drove your mother to be in the position that she was in, or that normally from your standpoint?
So they're mainly from my standpoint. I will say though, there was a time in that relationship where my mom did come to stay with me, and
Mm-hmm.
we were able to have the conversation about why she turned to addiction. And then it was
Right.
revealed that my mom was sexually assaulted, and so that was kind of the catalyst that
Mm-hmm.
started the cycle of her addiction. And so hearing that from her at a time where, one, I was now the caregiver for my mom, but then also two, I had maybe a year prior to me getting that knowledge, I was sexually assaulted, kind of
Mm-hmm.
shifted the way I started to look at her, because I went from feeling like this woman that was supposed to raise me, now I'm having to pretty much raise her, to now
Right.
this is another broken woman navigating this thing called life with the very little bit of tools that she had. And I'll tell you, the thing that changed it for me, Carolyn, was my mom said to me, when I revealed to her that I had been sexually assaulted as well, she cried
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, I never wanted this for my daughters. I always wanted to protect them. And I,
Exactly.
well, mom, how could you protect me when nobody was there to protect you? And that's when
That's
I
true.
started to see her differently. I started to see her as the woman and not my mom.
Right. And I can understand being from a child's aspect, you're like, I want to be protected as well. And that's your job. That's our job as parents. I have three children, well, four of my own, and I lost my daughter due to domestic violence, my oldest daughter, in 2019. So it's been a very difficult time. And as a parent, you do feel I I'm supposed to protect my children, and that's
Yeah,
some guilt you feel when something happens to them and you're not there. But when things are out of your hand and out of control, then it's the only thing you can do is turn to, like, I noticed you have a lot of spirituality, and I'm
mhm,
sure you display a lot of that in your books. Is that correct?
absolutely.
Is that some? I know you were raised by your grandmother, right?
Yeah.
So is your grandmother still with you?
Yes, I'm blessed to have both my grandmothers, my mom's side of the family, my father's side of the family. But my mother's
Okay.
mom was instrumental in my faith
Hmm.
and my
Hmm.
spirituality at a very young age. She taught me and my siblings about Jesus.
Hmm.
She made sure that we went to church, Sunday
Yeah, grandmas
school,
do that.
yeah, the Bible, we having Bible study, we praying, but like that was my life growing up. Um, but it wasn't always my life, and I always like to tell
Hmm.
that part of the story because around the age of 17 years old, my grandmother kind of sat me down and said to me, she's like, you know what, Leah, you're at that age of accountability. I'm not going to force you to go to church anymore. You're going to have
Hmm.
to know God for yourself. Like, you can't keep riding off of me and God's relationship. And so
Right.
at 17, 18 years old, when you give a young girl freedom, what do they do with it? They take the freedom,
Hmm.
right? So I
Hmm.
stopped going to church. I'm hanging out, I'm
Right.
partying, I'm living what I thought was my best life
And your truth,
until
yeah.
I ended up in a domestic violence situation. Until
Hmm.
I was 19, 20 years old, and I was with a man who was beating me and tearing me down. And to get out of that situation, I went right back to what my grandmother had taught me, which is to call on the
Hmm.
name of Jesus. And so the
Oh,
very
absolutely.
night that he came home drunk, because we had shared a apartment together, and he proceeded to beat me, I ran and I barricaded myself into our bedroom, and I just cried out. I literally said to God, I don't even know if you hear me. Like, I don't know
Hmm.
if you're going
Hmm.
to hear this prayer. I don't know if I'm so far disconnected from you. I don't know, but I need you to get me up out of this. And that if you do, I promise to serve you with my whole life. And literally the very next day, that man said, get out. And I knew then
Mm.
that that was God answering the prayer, and that He was letting me know that He still heard me, even though I had strayed all these years, and that He
Right.
was making the way of escape.
Now, do you feel, I know you felt at some points in your life and journey, you felt some resentment towards your mother. Did you ever feel, okay, mom, I know as a parent you're supposed to protect me, but did you also feel because of your relationship with God, that's what God was supposed to do as well? Did you ever feel like God let you down?
Yeah. I went through these tumultuous relationship with God. I'll tell you, my relationship with God started off very rocky. I
Hmm.
understood Him to be my heavenly Father, right? But it was hard to connect with that because my natural father wasn't there. And so to look at, God as my heavenly father as a young girl, it was like, well, my own biological daddy don't show up for me. So how am I supposed to expect you to show up for me?
Exactly.
So I
Hmm.
had to do a whole lot of really praying and surrendering and just asking God, just as basic as, God, show me how to view you as my father. Show me how to walk this thing out, because it was hard. My natural father let me down. So
Hmm.
initially I'm like, my heavenly father gonna let me down. Like that's what
Right, right. That's
it
your normal response to, yeah.
right. And
How do
so
you
he had to teach me.
Now, how did you bounce back from that? From feeling, you had the resentment and
Mhm.
you feel like isolation from your parents, mother and father. Now you felt that at a point in life, you're like, God, you're not here. I'm in this relationship that's not healthy and good for me. How did you bounce back? Because I
Therapy.
know they say all God, they always said that if your children, take your children to church and lean on Jesus, they always find their way back.
Oh
Did you
yeah.
find your way back because of the what was down up in your gut, even though you was resenting it at the time or turning away from it? What made you go back to those areas?
Yeah, I think coming out of that domestic violence relationship was the catalyst for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was me, one, recognizing, okay, God is truly who He said He is, and that I could take Him at His word because He got me out from that simple prayer. But then
Mm-hmm.
understanding that I now had to hold on my end of the bargain, right? Because I told Him,
Exactly.
get me out, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
servant. And
Right.
again, growing up in church, you're so accustomed to routine and religion. And I had to really, it was one of the elders in my church, who I love her to this day, who said to me that God does not want you to perform for Him. He just wants to know your heart. Because I didn't even know
Mm-hmm.
how to pray. I was just like, well, do I thus saith the Lord? Do I like, how do I
Mm-hmm.
do this thing? And she just said to me, tell Him what's on your heart. That's all He wants
Mm-hmm.
to know, is that He wants to
Right.
know what's on your heart. And so little by little, me and God began to develop this relationship where I could be that vulnerable with Him. I can say
Mm-hmm.
to Him, I feel broken today. I feel discouraged today. I feel hurt today. Right. And so I began to, one, stay in church.
Right.
Two, stay in my word, like really start to build up my word life. Continue to just have conversation with Him. I didn't, I tell people all the time, the Bible tells us that we are to reverence God, but you reverence Him in your way, right? It doesn't have to
Exactly.
be, thus save the Lord, God of hosts. Like it can be as simple as, God, you're amazing, and I thank you for waking me up this morning. Like it
All
doesn't
right.
have to be that dramatic, and I had to learn that. The other thing I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn was that God cares more for relationship, not religion, right? Religion
Good
makes us
point.
believe that we have to we have to present ourselves a certain way. We have to talk to
Mm-hmm.
Him a certain way. I've had religious folk that felt some type of way, because I tell anybody, when me and God talk, I'm like, what's up, G? Let's have a conversation, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
me and Him though. And people got offended. And I'm like, yeah, that's your religion that's getting offended. He cares about the relationship. He cares
Oh,
about what's
exactly.
going on with my daughter. And so I had to do that to begin to like I really spent a lot of years working on my spiritual foundation, and then later in life I began to add the therapy piece, because I understood that I could have both. I could have the cross and I could have the couch. Like I did not have to
Mhm.
choose.
Do you think now do you see a deviation now as far as a more relaxed relationship with God with COVID and all the different things that's happened lately where people churches actually were closed physically? but
Mhm.
it was only like an online connection. Do you, in your experience and from the people that you kind of generally be around, see more of a more relaxed relationship with God and not so structured and by the book?
Absolutely. I think I tell anybody, COVID to me was a blessing, right? It was a blessing
Hmm.
because I believe that God wanted to show his people that you did not need to be in a building for you to access me. I think for a very, very long time we have had been programmed in a sense to believe that I have to show up at church in order to connect with God. And that is absolutely not true. I can connect with God anywhere, anytime. He's that accessible. And so I think God shutting down the church was really his way of saying, you don't need a building to talk to me. I can
Oh,
meet you
exactly.
on your YouTube. I can meet you on Facebook. I can meet
Hmm.
you on your phone, your tablet, your TV, however you access me. I don't need a building to be accessible to. And so that was the beauty of COVID, was to show us that the things that we have believed are necessary, a part of our spiritual journey, are really not.
Hmm.
It's really
Right.
that simple. We can connect with him really that simple. And he wanted us to see that.
I think personally, I personally agree with that. I feel as if a lot of people were getting up, getting dressed, going to church, and it was such a task. And it makes it so, it's just so much easier now to just click on and you can go. But I do think every now and then you do still need to go touch down, if that's where you are. But I do, as you said, it's a individual relationship. It's
Yeah.
not all about the religion aspect. It's about your relationship and how you lean on him. And a friend of mine and I were talking, and we were talking about, a lot of times it's like they feel like God is just this untouchable thing. When you sit there and you get your own individual relationship with him, you learn how to communicate and it works for you. It's like anything. You have to make it work for you and not
Yeah.
what everyone else thinks. So I totally agree with you. I think it was a blessing in disguise too. But I do think every now and then you got to get there and congregate with people too. I
Yeah.
just think, for me anyway, you need that. Just because, the world is so full of all these other things we do, and sometimes it's good to just go and get a reality check every now and then, and be in
Yeah.
an environment. So I do agree with you on that. Now I do know that you're a therapist as well, right?
Yep.
All right. Tell me a little bit about that. And do you feel like some of the things you experience in your sessions or advice you give people kind of find their ways in your book sometimes?
Yeah, so
Or
I got
books?
into mental health, to be honest with you, Carolyn. I got into it because I wanted to figure out how to fix my dysfunctional family, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I got into the field because I started out, so my bachelor's degree is in criminal justice. Initially, I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of interning in different law firms, and I realized that what they showed on TV is not how it goes down in this in
Mm-hmm.
the law field. So I was like, this is boring. I don't want to do it. So then I kind of segued into the healthcare field. I started off doing like nursing assistant, medical assistant kind of stuff. And then I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I like connecting with people. I like helping people, but that wasn't it. And so deep down inside, God was kind of always calling me to the field of counseling. But again, I think that I kind of shied away from it and was like, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if I want to deal with people's issues because I have my own issues. But I eventually went back and got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And I actually ended up specializing in addiction and addictive behavior because of my parents. So when
Mm-hmm.
I got in the field, I started out in addiction and addictive behavior because I was curious to find out, how does one really get here, right? Like, I think that people think that sometimes addicts wake up, or a person wakes up and they're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get high today," and that's
I
usually
don't
not
think,
what
yeah.
happens. Like, there's a
Mm-mm.
series of events that kind of takes place that lead someone to make the decisions that they make. And so
I
I was
agree.
curious about that. And so that's what kind of led me to mental health. So I started out actually 10 years ago in February. I just celebrated 10 years in the field. I
Oh,
started out
congratulations.
in addiction and addictive behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, I just kind of learned that my job as a therapist is really not to fix anything or anyone. My job as a therapist is to guide my clients to the decisions and the solutions that they already have and know. The best advice
Mm-hmm.
one of my professors ever gave, Dr. Armstrong, she used to always tell us, it's your client's life anyway. Ultimately, people know where they want to end up in life. They know where they need to go. They know what they're desiring. They know your job as a therapist is to kind of guide them in that route to help them navigate that ship to end up where they want to end up. It's not to give advice, it's not to fix, it's not to do any of that because they already know.
But
So,
don't you think, as a professional, a lot of times when people become addicted, especially,
mhm.
to they're addicted to different things. And do you think? Well, I have a two-part question. Um, do you think some people have more addictive type of characteristics than other people? That's my first question. And my second question is, like, when someone is addicted or becomes addicted, because we're not, it's just something, like you say, something happens and causes that, or a series of things. Now we're on this particular type of drug or whatnot. um they're not their normal selves, so sometimes
Mhm.
they make, and most times they make decisions that they would not normally make had they not been addicted. So even though they may know it's right, their body is calling for one thing and their mind knows something different. It's very difficult to fix something when you have two things fighting against each other. So those are my questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that's why. So we now call that in the field of mental health co-occurring disability, co-occurring disorders, right? So a
Hmm.
co-occurring disorder is when you have somebody that is battling with an addiction and a mental illness, right? Because we know the addiction is what they're 9 times out of 10 feeding, right? Which is the substance. Let me give them, like, it's the drug, it's the drinking, it's whatever, right? But
Hmm.
then we also have learned and in studies that same substance can then cross over into mental illness. So then the mental illness piece is where we have the disconnect in behavior. Like you said, they're not being who they would normally be. They're not acting like they would normally act if they weren't on this drug. And I think that's
Hmm.
the reason why so many addicts stay on the drug for very long, because they don't even know how to operate in
Not
sobriety. They don't
right.
know how to operate outside of the drug. I can use my parents as both examples, right? Like,
Mhm.
the most I've seen my mother and father ever sober is 1 year. And then after that year, it's like they're right back at it because it's a whole other world.
Do you think something stimulates them? I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think something in life stimulates them to go back to it, or it's just their bodies calling for that?
I truly believe it's their bodies calling for that. But then I also, again, the mental health in me kicks in, and then there's a mental illness piece, right? Because that's
Mhm,
all I know, right? So one of the
mhm,
things I always try to teach about recovery, especially for addicts, is that we have to it's almost like you have to paint a billboard picture of, why should I give up this thing, right? Because if the drug is all I know, if the alcohol is all I know, what's on the other side of that? And it's the
mhm,
same concept in any type of change in somebody's life, right? If I'm comfortable in my dysfunction, give me a reason why I should stop being
mm,
dysfunctional, because dysfunction
right.
is working for me right now, right?
Mhm,
So you
mhm,
kind of have to paint this picture of what recovery would look like. And so that's one of the things in mental health that kind of gets screwed or misconstrued a little bit, is because you'll have, for example, two addicts in the same program, right? One
mhm.
addict may still be in the shelter, another addict may be, renting a low cost apartment. To the one that's in the shelter, they're looking at the one that's getting the apartment, and it's like, but you still doing the same thing I'm doing.
Right.
So
They find a
why,
reason to make it right.
right? So why should I give up this drug?
Right, right. Is that the same as a functional, what is it? The term, a functional addict?
Hmm.
Like when I've heard that term before. That people say they're functional addicts. Like they go to work during the day, you have no clue. And then after 5, it's like a whole different vibe.
Yep. So functional addicts are typically individuals that can pretty much live a regular day-to-day life. They can go to work, they can go to school, they can pay their bills, but then they still need some type of substance to maintain, right? And usually when you see functional addicts, 9 times out of 10, there's a underneath that is some type of mental illness. So they may be battling with a depression, they may be battling with anxiety, they may be battling with something that the substance is kind of helping them escape from, because
Mhm,
that's usually
mhm,
what drugs does, is a suppressant. It helps you to escape from your reality. And so that's where the term functional comes from, because they're still battling with an addiction. It's just not
mhm.
to the point where they need somebody to take care of their bills for them, right? They can still
Mm-hmm.
manage, they can still live life. They just, like you said, after 5 o'clock, they're a whole different
Whole
person.
different vibe. Are those type people some of the most difficult people to treat, or are they
Absolutely.
probably equal across the board?
No. Functional addicts are harder to treat because they don't think they have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see that their drinking is a problem. They don't see that the drug use is a problem because in their mind, it has not affected my
The day to day.
activities of daily living. Like I haven't lost
Mm-hmm.
my job, my bills are not behind, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
good. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, you could still approach it from the same standard of like, hey, I see you have this problem and I want to address it. But in their mind, ain't nothing falling apart. So until
So why
something
fix it?
starts falling apart, stop talking to me about my problem because clearly I
Right.
got it under control.
So if it's not broken, why fix it?
Yeah.
We can make it work. Do you think that there's a higher percentage of children that will reach out to drugs or have some sort of type of addictive behavior when they have had parents that have exemplified that as growing up?
Absolutely. It's statistically been proven that children of addicts are more likely to develop some type of addictive behavior. So I tell anybody I'm one of 6 siblings. Me and all my siblings have some form of addictive behavior. It's just
Hmm.
different for every one of us, right?
Hmm.
Luckily for none of us, it's drugs or alcohol, but retail therapy is a form of addictive behavior, right? Needing to
Right.
do anything because you have to think of what addiction is. It's using a substance of any kind to escape a reality, right? So
Exactly.
whatever that looks like, it might be playing video games all day. That's a
Hmm.
form of addictive behavior. So children of addicts are definitely more likely to develop some type of addiction or addictive behavior.
I figured I figured that. Now, if you do you ever find it that there are sometimes two parent households, like both parents, like in your situation you had your mother and father, were they together in a household, or were they separated?
They were separated. My parents were never married. My mom was my father's first mother of his children, and then he had another woman who same process. She was an addict too, so the codependency there.
And most often they probably are in those that type of circle
Yep.
of people. And the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. You normally be around people and with people that do the same things that you're doing. Hi,
Mhm.
Shanika. Thanks for tuning in. Mauricia, thank you guys. I appreciate you being here. If you have some questions for my guests, Leah, just please shoot it in, and I will send it over to her. Let her know. But I guess it's so difficult because it's like you said, it's very difficult to fix something when a person doesn't realize that it's broken. And
Mhm.
do they most often treat those particular type people with medication, or a combination of medication and mental health?
So the best solution to mental illness or any substance we have seen is a combination of medication and talk therapy.
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, most addicts are not talking. they're not.
Right.
They're just not going to get to the root of what's really going on. They'll take the medication, and then you even with the medication, sometimes depending on what's prescribed by a psychiatrist, um,
Hmm.
could add to their addiction, right? Because then they become addicted to the pill. But we have seen that when you have medication and talk therapy, it's
Hmm.
the most effective way of really dealing with the deep core issues that many addicts run from because they just don't want to face it.
Do you find that some people just they is it a lifetime of treatment, or is it at some point people actually kick the habit and then they can just live functional lives? Like you said, your parents went back and forth. You don't remember anything longer than a year where your parents were sober, or not on something. Do you think someone can actually kick the habit and they can live just a normal functioning life without medication?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a combination of both, but it also depends on the resilience of the person. I think that
Hmm.
I know I have friends who have parents that were addicts that have remained sobriety for 10 plus years. You would have never even known they were an addict unless they told you.
Right.
Have gone on to live successful lives. And then I know others just like my parents, you know, in and out of prison, in and out of addiction, in and out of hospitals. It really depends on the resilience
Of the
of the
person.
person. The other piece too is the support system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of addicts, especially in my family, at some point there was a disconnect between my parents and us as a family, because it was the, you know, what people don't realize about addiction is that it's not just the person that's addicted that's going through this disease, it's
Mm-hmm.
the family too, right? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
the ones that's also dealing with the up and down, the roller coaster, the phone calls, this person calling like we're dealing with that too, and that's weighing on us as
Exactly.
well. And so what happens is that a lot of addicts lose their support system because at some point the loved one gets to the point of, I can't do this no more. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to
Right.
disconnect. I have to put boundaries. And I can share from even my own personal experience, it took a very long time to disconnect from my mom, because out of all six of her children, I was the one that every time she ended up in the hospital, every time she ended up, you know, at somebody's rehab, every time she thought she was going to die, I was getting a phone call. So you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine what my life was like,
Oh,
constantly living
absolutely.
on eggshells, constantly waiting for the phone call, constantly, and I wasn't living my life. My grandmother, her mom was like, Leah, I really need you to disconnect because this is
Mm-hmm.
literally taking over your life. And it really wasn't until her very last time where she again had an opportunity to get her life together. She did it for a little bit and then went right back to doing the drugs. And when that
Mm-hmm.
happened, I was like, that's it. I'm done. You have lost
D-
the one that's advocated for you for 20 something years. I'm done.
Do you think some of the reason why you stay when you're the caregiver or the person that's there, the support system, is because you have a sense of guilt? You feel like if you're not there to that person, you could lose them totally and indefinitely?
Yeah, you know, for me, it was that little girl longing for her mommy. That's
Mm-hmm.
literally what it was. And I didn't realize that until I began to do my own healing and realized how much little girl Leah, the little girl that had always wanted her mommy and her daddy, was calling the shots, right?
Mm-hmm.
She was, I was kicking and screaming and saying, but it's my mommy, it's my mommy, it's my mommy. And whereas my siblings, they had disconnected. And I would look at them like, how could you? Like, how could you disconnect from our mother? It's our mother. But they had to
Mm-hmm.
set those boundaries so that they weren't so warped in her life like I was. And it
Right.
wasn't until I started my own healing process that I realized that I can love my parents from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
I okay to put boundaries. I think a lot of times we
Mm-hmm.
don't set boundaries with families because there's this underlining or unspoken thing about, but that's your family member. Yeah, but if your family member is toxic and they're draining you and it's not a beneficial relationship, it's absolutely okay to put the boundary there and say, I can love you from a distance.
Well, that was my next question. Do you think it's okay for that person that's the support system to say, okay, enough is enough? I have to step back because if I don't, then it's going to be me next in one way,
Yeah.
shape, or form.
You have to, because what's going to happen is that the weight of that is going to overtake you. You know, when I was being a full-time caregiver for my mom and chasing my mom, like I was behind in school. I was not taking care of myself physically. I wasn't taking care of myself emotionally. Like high
Mm-hmm.
stress, high anxiety. I'm living my life literally on edge because I don't know when the next time somebody's gonna call me and tell me she ended up somewhere. Right? Like that
Right.
was life. It was hard to have relationships because my
Mm-hmm.
friends were like, girl, I don't got time for that. And then if I was trying to date anybody, if you didn't understand, it was like, I don't got time for that. Like, that's just too much. So it weighed on me a lot. And I think when you get to that place where it's starting to really overtake you, you got to
Mm-hmm.
take a step back.
For your own well-being. For your
Yeah.
own well-being, yeah. Now, moving forward a little bit now, because I know you have written so many books and you have all this vast experience in your young life to build upon. Do you foresee your books going to the next level? Would you like to eventually take it out of a book and put it into a movie or a play?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you say that because I'm definitely throwing myself into the filmmaking industry now as we speak. I was recently in a documentary about
Mm-hmm.
called Life After Loss, which was about Black women in the journey to motherhood, and then that really piqued my interest into filmmaking. So now I'm producing a different documentary on Black women and sexual assault, but I was having that conversation with my team about how awesome it will be to help authors turn their books into film. It's a short story. So I would love to see one of my books come to life in a film form. Absolutely.
Well, I think that would be great because it does seem like you have a whole lot in there that you could share. And I think that would be great if you can take it from a book. Because, you know, everyone doesn't sit down and read. What about audio? Have you ever put any on audio?
Yeah, so 3 of them are on audiobook. I'm in the process of getting the rest of them on audiobook. That alone is a process because there's a lot of recording and editing and all that good stuff. But 3 of them are. The very first book is on audiobook. So because I do understand offering multiple ways people can view stuff. Like you said, everybody's not going to open a book, but most of my books are either paperback, ebook, and audiobook for sure.
Okay. So like you said, they're more short stories, you said? Is that what you said earlier?
No, they're full-length stories, about 10 to 12 chapters each book.
Okay.
But they're different experiences in my life. And so I'm actually releasing my 8th and final book. People think I'm crazy when I say it's the final. This is the final. But it's happening summer of this year, and it's called Born to be Unbound. And it's the first book that I've written from a place of healing. So people really get an insight of what my healing journey has looked like, how I've been able to really heal that little girl within and really walk into this newfound freedom that God has promised me that I can have. And that it was me the time that just had to work on that and understand that he gave me that from his word and that it was okay to live that. So I'm excited for the 8th and final one to drop.
Well, Shanika wanted me to tell you congratulations, one of our viewers. So now, I know that you are you have an award, right? It says you are. It's her. The acronym is HER. H.E.R. And it's an international award. Tell me a little bit about that.
Woman on the Rise. So the incredible and incomparable Dr. Dashe Zorn, this is her ministry. It's called I Am Her Women, and she really does a great job of uplifting men. And so someone had nominated me as Women on the Rise. I was Women on the Rise 2021, and the award,
congratulations.
Thank you, was to nominate a woman who was literally doing what I always say I do, which is turn my pain into power and show other women that you can overcome anything in your life. It does not have to keep you bound. You are created to be free in the first place. You're created with a purpose and on purpose. And so when I got that nomination, I was just floored. I was like, whoa, somebody thought enough of me to nominate me, but I ended up winning, and I was 2021's I Am Her International Woman on the Rise.
Well, congratulations. I definitely appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your life experiences with us. It was definitely uplifting, and I'm sure everyone has someone. I always tell people to share and make sure they spread the word, because this Leah's story is not a foreign story. In our families, if it's not a mother or a father, it could be an aunt or someone that we love dearly that may be able to relate to the various stories you have written. So I would like to say, if you want to follow her or you would like to be in contact with her, you can look into the link information that I have here, and it'll take you to her social media pages, and you can find out a little bit more about her or conversate with her. I'm sure she will answer if you connect. So I want to say thank you. I enjoyed your story. You were an awesome guest, and I wish you so much success. And I'm going to be looking into you, young lady, and following you. All right, Leah. Thank you so much, and I will be in touch. Thanks for being a guest. All right, hon. Take care.